Hello, friends.
Hello, hello.
Hi. Welcome to our YouTube Live. This is Child of the Redwoods Live. We're two former public school teachers who chose to homeschool their own children forever and maybe ever, share their views on education, parenting, Montessori, life, and love. So hi, welcome to our live. Come on in and let's chat about Montessori.
Yeah, I'm David. We are so excited to have you here. We're, kind of here to help you decide what kind of an education you might like to give your own children. So whether you homeschool full time or not, we believe that education is a journey you take with your children, and the opportunities for learning start over every day.
They actually do.
So hopefully, if you can't hear us, or you're having any tech issues, just let us know in the comments. But let's go ahead and roll into it. Today, we've got a kind of an interesting topic. Read an article recently in the New Yorker about privilege in Montessori and sort of the perception of who is Montessori for. But first, a couple updates on Child of the Redwoods.
Yeah, so as far as what's going on around here, the Homeschool of the Redwoods primary course has started and it is off to a smooth start. I just gave a live this morning talking about rhythm and routine. So hello to those of you who are watching, who are also in that course. And if you missed your opportunity to enroll in that course, but you wanted in, you can still enroll in the primary course. Enrollment will be starting up.
Yeah, we'll be starting again
fall.
next week for fall, so it's early enrollment. Yeah. So if you join next week, you'll get anytime after next week, you will go ahead and get full access to the course content. Plus, we'll get you into the private community, and then the live section, the synchronous section for fall will start in, I think it's August or September. You'll have to check the calendar for sure.
Usually August.
I think it's August to September. So if you're interested in that, head over to our website, childoftheredwoods.com, and get our details.
Yeah. So we also, in Constellation, we are still working on the theme of drum.
That's right. Drum in all of its many forms. So we have eardrums, and we have drumstick, veg drumsticks. And we have parts of the ear. We have a bunch of different activities. We've got some neat stuff. We did one this month on it's kind of a math and music. So the symbol plus quarter note plus the representation. So matching that. We also did a 4-part card this month on the ear. I don't know if you can see this. Oh, it's shiny. There we go. And those are fun. You can also make your own. And we also did one on drums of the world. So it's got the matching there. We did 6 different continents, Antarctica not included. The Antarctic contribution to drumming is small, I suppose.
Unfortunately.
But
just penguins.
Just the penguins for now. But yeah, it's really exciting. Next month we have mud, which is just in time for, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, we've got spring, or Southern Hemisphere coming into a new season. I guess it'll be fall, right? So mud, and we're going to be talking about not just mud pies. We've got parts of an earthworm. We've got composting, pinch pots, printable cards on dwellings of the world. Something on making like mud bricks. So a lot of different stuff for all ages, 2.5 to 9. And hope to, if you're interested in that, again, check us out on the website and see what it's all about.
Yeah, and a last note, our lower elementary program will be starting enrollment for the fall pretty soon. It opens on May 30th. So if you have a child who's a little bit older, we have a program for ages 6 to 9. And so that one's really just around the corner. It's coming up pretty soon.
That's right. Yeah, and it's a really exciting program. We developed it. It took several years for us to build. We rolled it out a couple years ago. We've been super honored by the number of folks that have already joined us in that program. It really is covering the 8 core concepts on. Yeah, thanks, Julie. The 8 core academic content subject areas for elementary, plus we have a 9th unit on theory and planning and getting your day together. And for those of you who are already in Constellation and wondering about the overlap, we actually got that as a question emailed to us last week. And the answer is that you take something like Child of the Redwoods, the lower elementary homeschool program, or even the primary program to learn the how, the theory and the methods. And something like constellation is sort of the what you can do. So, for example, with mud or with drum, that we're currently working on a constellation, there are things that you would do. For example, music is a part of the lower elementary curriculum. And so there's a music activity, and you would, move it up or down based on the level, and we give guidance on that. So I'm really excited about these different programs and how they fit together. And it's always cool to see in our community how people are putting those to use and how they're kind of hacking them and making them come to life in their own homes.
Yeah, so we've got primary and lower elementary. Those are foundation. Constellation is like in the practice, the day-to-day kind of rhythm of Montessori. All right, that's really all I have for our updates.
Right, that's enough selling. Let's talk about something else.
So we also have some updates to share with you from our own family. This is kind of a brave action that we are starting.
When we started the live, our idea was we wanted to share kind of in two ways. We wanted to talk about, theory and concepts, higher ideas, that sort of thing. And today we have that topic on who is Montessori for, and the article specifically and more broadly. But we also wanted to talk a little bit about our own experiences. We've been, we are teachers. We were public school teachers. Aubrey, you also taught in private school as well. I've worked in digital learning for many years, so very dedicated educators. And so for us, like going into homeschooling it's been a journey. And sometimes we get questions like, is it easy? Is it hard? How do you get, how do you stay in sync? And it's tough. It's a journey. You have to work together. So we also wanted to use these lives as a way to kind of talk a little bit about what it's really like, at least for us, to homeschool. And actually, for this week, we wanted to talk about something that happened in January, and that was we got COVID, like too many people in this world. And the reason we're bringing it up is that basically, the boys, they handled it fine. Like they got sick. They were sick for a little bit, but Aubrey and I, we're not as young as they are. Things hurt more and they last longer. It's at some point when you're in your grays. And so it took us a little bit longer to kind of snap back. And basically for that period of time, we just kind of had to stop homeschooling.
Yeah, we weren't home. I mean, we were homeschooling, officially, but we didn't actually do any homeschooling.
Not any serious homeschooling. The boys have some outside of the home classes that they do virtually that they continued. And we did try to maintain some structure, but between work, family, keeping, cooking, all the sorts of things we have to do, there just was a lot less time and honestly energy because we felt so run down and sick that to give into it. And, you could feel really guilty about it. I mean, even we feel guilty about it, even though we know like it's the children are flexible and we can recover. And so I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about why routine is important, but also how important it is to forgive yourself when you have to sort of accommodate other parts of your life.
Yeah. Our routine was totally knocked out of whack. And mostly I stayed in bed for a few days, and then we went to the couch and we just relaxed on the couch, and our kids are older. So, it was kind of easier to do that. I remember being sick while having really little children was really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like if you have the Montessori method kind of in place, it can be easier for you as parents while you're navigating stuff like that. For example, we rarely feed our children anymore. They feed themselves. Like the food is available.
Let's be very clear. The children have all the food they need.
Yeah. But like we have, I know that this, we have older kids. Of course, they can go in there and make themselves a snack. But actually, that's like not actually the case for all kids who are as old as ours. A lot of kids get super dependent on somebody else making their food for them.
That's right.
And it continues no matter, even when they're in school. If you think about kids who get their lunches at school, they're often just handed a tray. Here's your tray of food. Now go eat it.
Right.
And a lot of other kids, are handed a lunchbox. Here's your lunchbox of food. And, we prepare those kind of things with love as parents because, going to school and other things can be pretty stressful for kids anyway. But that independence factor is kind of let go of in lieu of this aspiration towards efficiency.
That's right.
Yeah. So at home, we've worked actually really, really hard at helping our children to be independent, not necessarily with their math or their academic subjects
That's
all
right.
the time. I'm not saying that they're independent with everything, but they are independent in terms of their basic needs.
That's right.
And they have been for a long, long time. It didn't just start, when they were, I don't know, 9 or 10 and technically capable. It started way back when they were really, really little, when they were like babies. We started giving them choices and offering little tiny ways that they could feel independence. And then as they got to be toddlers, they started to crave more independence. I do it myself.
Yeah.
So it's really started with the little things like, would you like to eat peas or would you like to eat carrots, right? Or maybe sample a little of each. It's up to you which you want to eat. And then little offerings of independence with self-care. Here is your toothbrush, rather as opposed to just going in there and brushing their teeth for them all the time, giving them the opportunity, even though they don't do a great job necessarily until they're much older.
Yeah.
They do a better job now, but still not as good of a job as probably an adult does with their teeth. But you're offering that first, that little bit of independence. And so we did that in the kitchen. We just started purchasing food that we were fine with them eating. I kind of had a rule that said whatever is in our house is available. So we didn't have cookies that often, or when we did, they were just like devoured and they were gone. And if we did have them in the house, like I was fine with them eating them.
And to be clear, we had to, you have to accommodate the reality. There's some really great comments happening here in the chat. Our second born has a real sweet tooth. We didn't have that with our firstborn. He'll just eat carrots all day. He loves
carrots. Are pretty sweet too. But
they are, but they're not like cane sugar or something. So he'll eat carrots or peppers or something. He just loves fruits and vegetables and always has. Our second born has that classic sweet tooth, and there was a period where we'd find him. We'd keep honey or sugar for cooking or something like that around the house, and we'd go in and he'd basically have he'd somehow have hijacked his way all the way up to the top of the cabinet and was sneaking in there like some kind of a spy craft moment. And we're like, "What are you doing? You're gonna." So
can't you just eat cauliflower like your brother?
Yeah,
we're not saying.
We're thinking that hard, but no, we did. We're like, you can't eat this too much sugar, and this is why it's bad for your body. And at some point, we just had to stop buying it because it just didn't work. Right? You had to accommodate the reality that you were in, and that's totally fine. At some point, he learned the self-discipline necessary because he grew up more. Right?
And then the maple syrup came back in the house.
And the maple syrup came back in the house. He still is like a raging sweet tooth. He has a raging sweet tooth, but he's learned more self-discipline, and it's because this goes to the idea that we talked about it kind of in our last live. Like you need freedom, but you also need those parameters, the rules. And so this was a way to sort of say, we're going to teach you how to have self-control. It's obviously going to be harder for you with candy and things like that, but we're going to try and make the environment easier for you, even if it ultimately was kind of a pain in the neck for us, right? Because let's say I might want some honey in my oatmeal. There's no honey. But it's short-term pain, long-term gain to help the child through that moment. And that's the kind of the scaffolding work that we're trying to do.
Yeah. So to do that in the very beginning, it's really not that hard. Start with small choices. Those little OXO pop containers are great for toddlers to get in and out of their snacks pretty easily. You can designate a place in the fridge where your kids, you just have available snacks. There are ways that you can put limits around what foods your kids are allowed to eat or not. And a lot of families do that, but we really didn't. We really just pantry is your oyster. The refrigerator is open to you. Whatever you want in there, really, that you have the desire for, you may have, unless It's something that like goes with the recipe that we really need. And so we would have to run into those issues too. Sometimes ingredients would be eaten up and then we wouldn't get to make the recipe. And, fortunately, we have been privileged enough to be able to go out and run and to the grocery store and get that ingredient if needed, or do without it in the recipe.
Sure.
But those were all life lessons our kids learned with food. And so fast forward up to this point, they are pretty independent, just during the regular school day. I really don't think about their breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
We usually cook one major meal a day. Sometimes it's for lunch.
Yeah, make sure there's food in the fridge.
Or a dinner, like we'll have a family dinner, because that's also important to us to have that family time together, especially as the kids get older and they get more self-involved teenagers.
Yeah.
But so it's important to have those kinds of structures. But absolutely, the idea is that we wanted to teach them how to be self-sufficient so that they could be successful human adults. And it was funny, every now and again we hear that. I remember a few months ago we were interacting with someone, I don't remember what, it was a store or something, and she was talking about her sons who were in college and how they can't cook, how that is. And we were
kids can't cook for themselves.
These are like 19-year-olds.
They can't do his laundry.
She's like, you know how that is. You have sons. And we were like, oh, well, actually, it's the cleaning part that's harder. Like, don't cook it. But
Well, I think our rhythm has evolved over the years. We took more responsibility. Of course, when they were toddlers, we were hyper aware of what they were eating, and preschoolers and young elementary kids too. But somewhere in there, we kind of found ourselves losing more awareness of what they were eating and when they were eating, because they became so independent with their own food.
That's right.
And so I would, I would go in and I would check and say, you had lunch yet? And be like, oh yeah, I ate a whatever. And you kind of just get used to your kids being independent like that. So our rhythm right now is kind of more like community family cooking. One of us will go in there and make a big pot of something. Sometimes it's me that does it. Sometimes it's David. Mm-hmm. We both work from home now. And sometimes it's one of the kids will go in there, but whoever's in there cooking is usually thinking about the family. And so when our youngest goes in there and makes eggs, he almost always comes out and asks everybody else in the family, it says, I'm making eggs. Does anybody else want these eggs?
That's right.
This morning, just a few hours ago, I finished up my live for primary, and I went upstairs and I made a pot of oatmeal, but I didn't make it just for myself, right? I made enough for everybody. And then all I did was I just went in the kids' rooms and I said, hey, just want to let you know I made some oatmeal. And then I went back to my work. Okay. But I didn't serve them. We didn't have a big fancy meal. And sometimes we do love to have fun, big family dinners with all the silverware out on the plates and we share a meal together. But during the day, mostly, it's just kind of a feed yourself situation and a community food making experience.
And kind of to tie that back to the COVID piece, I mean, it's teaching this kind of self-reliance comes in play when you do have to break your routine.
Yep.
So it helps that you're not, that you can rely on each other. And, what a child can do at different ages, we have a second and a third playing child, is very different than what an adult can do. And it's very different from each other. But they really actually, that responsibility is incredibly powerful to them. It feels so empowering. And for that reason, it's challenging, but it's worth that effort. Because when you do have those moments where you have to break your routine, you can fall back on the things that matter. We talked a little bit about it last time. Like, what is the center of your education? We often get kind of uptight about following the rules. We get nervous when we don't do I didn't do this amount of work today or that. And it's because in our minds, we tend to think of education as very, very rigidly structured. There's a bell, there's a hierarchy of authority, you sit in rows or pods or something. And then when we see something like Montessori education, we think, oh, this is crazy radical, because they don't seem to be following it. The fact is, there is still a rhythm and a routine and a kind of rigidity that's happening there too.
Yeah.
But it's all about the purpose. What is the purpose of that? And for Montessori or for us, the purpose is to be child-centric or learner-centric, or as a homeschooling family, being family-centric with our education, as opposed to maybe school-centric, which is thinking about how it's best for the school environment to move many, many hundreds or thousands of children through a process. So there's a reason we structure things a certain way, and we might imagine that this is the way school's supposed to work, but it's actually not. It should work the way that's right for the child, and then beyond that, the child and his or her surroundings in the family. And that's to be learner-centric or child-centric, and we know that that is actually the best way to structure learning.
It is. I see in the comments a comment about from Smoothie says, my second plane child isn't quite able to do any independent work right now, and it can be frustrating. Yes, it can be frustrating. Yes, it really can. Ours don't either do a ton of independent academic work on their own. You know, they do things that they are personally interested in, but it might not be the things that we necessarily think they should be doing. Right. And so there's a lot of give and take in that. There's a lot of patience, you know, that I think is important to aspire towards. You know, we don't always have it.
And children, as adults, we're not always able to articulate what we really want. So that's the other lesson kind of from having COVID, or anytime you have any kind of longer disruption in your flow, your children, or as you might look at that and say, oh, I don't want to get back into the swing of things, or they might fight you on it. But I promise that once you reinstitute that rhythm and routine, they're actually going to really, really shine. They're going to love it, because they may outwardly say, oh, you know, I'm comfortable just like setting my own pace and doing my own thing, but we actually really like, oh gosh.
That's all right. David's phone just went off.
Oh my gosh. It's a hyper important call from the president of space. This is live, folks. Sorry. But having that routine, getting them back into that routine again, is really, really important, and they'll actually really thrive from it. So taking a break is fine. Going back to the rhythm is great. And you know, for your child who's not quite ready for that independent work, that's totally fine. Continue to support, continue to give them the structure, and eventually it will blossom.
I would like to throw out a thought here.
Okay.
That you started with adults. And then my mind finished the sentence with, adults don't necessarily do independent work very well either.
That's right.
Yeah, no, like I just think about how many times you yourself have tried or needed to sit down and do completely independent work by yourself, and the kind of persistence that takes, determination, the knowledge, maybe the monetary reward that is attached to it. Humans are innately social creatures, and so to look at our children and to say you should be able to do this work independently without any other motivation for it, I think is a really big ask for our kids, especially when homeschooled. In a school situation, we're used to thinking of children doing a lot of independent work, even in the primary years, but you have to think about the kind of conditions that facilitate that behavior. It's different from homeschooling. So in a school situation, you've got a lot of teacher pressure, like you've got big expectations, you've got a history of independent work, working in one's own space, you've got a lot of peer pressure. Everybody else is doing the same thing, or all kind of working independently. And that is not necessarily the case at home.
That's right.
Right? Yeah. I mean, so your child might expect you, might kind of be offended or intimidated by independent work, even in those elementary years. And that is 100% normal. It can take a long time for independence to develop, as David said. And that long time could be like years and years. And with some children, it might happen earlier, and some children might be super social, but just by temperament, just by their nature. And we have one child who is great with independent work, has always done a lot of independent work. And we have one child who's just super social and just wants to be with us. And the lessons are more about the conversations that we're having, and a lot less about I'm going to sit down and do this work. He will if we ask him, but he's not just going to go out of his way and just go do some random math.
Right.
It's more about like, let's talk about this thing and we'll converse through it. All right, we've got to kind of transition here because I want to make sure that we have time to talk about our article. Did any of you have a chance to read it? You can comment and let us know. The article is called "The Miseducation of Maria Montessori," a title that
it's a very clickbait title, don't you think?
It kind of turned my stomach. I just reading the title. David said he texted it to me. He was like, "Ooh, look at this! It's from the New Yorker." And I read the title and I was like, ugh. Because it just felt, I don't know. Everybody likes to take Montessori and like poke fun at it. It feels to me, and I just, I feel like it's just such a soulful way to educate that it doesn't take much to like raise my prickly defensive hairs, right? And so this title did already, but she actually asked a really good question. It's not a question that's never been asked before. It's a question that we have been talking about for a long time and that other Montessorians have been talking about for a long time. So there's nothing new here. But she poses the question, is Montessori for the elites? Is it for the privileged class?
Right.
And she's right to ask this question and to write an article about it because Maria Montessori, whereas she did her own work, the bulk of it for the public, for children who, were among the have-nots of her own society. In the modern world that we exist today, Montessori is very much kind of considered an exclusive educational method, for the private elite of our society. And, there are public Montessori schools out there. Yeah. I have observed in several of them. I know teachers who teach in them. There is definitely a public school, and I know parents whose children are in them. There's definitely a public school Montessori movement out there, but it's not like every school is a Montessori school. It's not like every child has the opportunity to be in one of those schools. I remember when we were living in Dallas, there are now 3 public Montessori schools in Dallas. At least to my knowledge, I think there are at least 3, and 2 of them were schools. One of them was kind of close-ish to our house.
That's right.
Drive there, and we attended a parent education tour of that school, and I remember going to that tour, being kind of excited, nervous, like, could this be the school my kid could go to? And then we looked at the wait list, and the lottery to get into that school was thousands for just like 1 or 2 tiny little preschool classrooms, like thousands of parents on the wait list in the lottery to be in the school. And so at that point, I was teaching in a private Montessori school, and we were kind of hoping to swing Montessori education that way. But we were also kind of looking ahead at our future in Montessori. And while the school seemed great and free and public, I just thought, what are our chances of getting in? I even had a hard time being a teacher in those schools in Dallas, because at the time that I started teaching, there were only 2. And I was like, I'm a Montessorian. I want to get into these schools. I would love to be a teacher there. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out how to get a job in these schools because it was, I don't know how they were hiring their teachers, but I couldn't even figure out a way to get in the door, friends. So it was, even though we are white educated people in America, even we really struggled, to get our kids a Montessori education. And eventually that did lead us down the path of choosing homeschooling, as another option for us. But, so she does have a point to that. Montessori education is also well perpetuated as being an education for the elite class. And if you go look on even, well-meaning Montessori school pages, you'll find proud teachers and school administrators talking about all of the powerful, famous, influential people who have all been raised Montessori and maybe done something great with their lives, as though the Montessori method created these people. And I'll just list some of them for you. Jeff Bezos, who created Amazon, Larry Page, and I don't know how to say Sergey Sergey Brin, who are the Google founders, like Google came from Montessori, how amazing, right? The former presidential daughter, Chelsea Clinton, a huge Montessori advocate, even speaking at Montessori conferences, very vocal for the Montessori. The singer Taylor Swift. That was kind of a new one for me. I didn't know she was a Montessori kid, but we can say, oh, Taylor Swift was a Montessori kid. That's why she got famous and she's so amazing, right? And then several years ago, back in I think 2015 or so, the news came out that little Prince George was being raised in a Montessori way and was attending a Montessori school, and that gave the Montessori community a big push, right? I was admitting Montessori 101 in the Facebook group during those days, and I remember that after that news came out, just swarms of people were coming into the group because who doesn't want to raise a prince? It's good enough for a prince, it's good enough for my kid, right? So all of this is great publicity for Montessori, but it also sends a message
That's right.
Right? That says Montessori is for great people, for wealthy people, and it's going to make your kid into something creative and
the next billionaire inventor,
a wealthy, right? It's going to make your wealthy kid into an even wealthier adult, right?
So, and by and large, the reality is these arguments about is Montessori for the elites or not, it kind of lives in the small corners of the world where Montessorians are, frustrated parent, perhaps like the author of the article, are sort of talking to each other. You're not going to run into this on an everyday basis, but it does exist. And every now and again, it does bubble up, like in this article, this in the New Yorker that written by Jessica Winter, This Education of Maria Montessori. The subtitle, I think, kind of spells it out. Her quote, "Her method was meant for the public, then it became a privilege." And so there's very weighty words there, a lot of very loaded words there. And again, I don't necessarily know that the criticism is coming from a completely wrong spot. I don't agree with the conclusions, but it's a legitimate question when we look around. It is sad the number of the rarity of a Montessori or even other forms of education for any child. It just is very, very, very narrow, and that's a kind of a sin. It's a social sin. So how did this happen?
So the article is actually based, it's like a review of a book, which I found fascinating. It's not a book I've ever read. The book is called The Child is the Teacher. It is a brand new biography of Maria Montessori. So we bought a copy, and we'll let you know in another live video, whether it's a great book to read or not. But I can tell you that I have read two other biographies that are very common, written about Maria Montessori. One of them is E.M. Standing's book, Maria Montessori, Her Life and Work, and it's a really sweet read. It was written, I think, back, I don't know, in the 50s, I think in the 50s, and it's written kind of like, it kind of reminds me of the way an old 1950s announcer would be talking, about news events. You can almost visualize, the antiquated scenes in this. It's just a very kind of formally written and very endearing piece of writing. It kind of feels like E.M. Standing kind of feels like a grandpa to me, right? Like what grandpa would say about Maria Montessori in back in the 50s. And the other one, the one that I actually was required to read for my own Montessori training as a primary source, is this book by Rita Kramer, Maria Montessori, A Biography. And this book I really like. It's written much more for a modern audience. I think it was written in the 90s. I may or may not be right on that. Let's see, 1988. So pretty close. Yeah. Late 70s, late 80s, kind of that era. That book was written, and to me, it felt much more readable and a little more objective. So Rita Kramer just did a lot of research, and from what the article seems to be saying, the book that was just written is a lot like this one. It's tells a lot of the same stories. The author had the same kind of access to Maria's work and letters, and the documents that are kept at AMI headquarters.
That's
I
right.
assume
Locked in the secret vault.
Yes. Yes. But we can access those through these great biographies, and this one is a really worthy read. So I will for sure let you know how the other one is. But what I want to do is I looked it up online, just a little preview, and I want to read to you just a little bit of the beginning of this new book called "The Child is the Teacher." Right? The Child is the Teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And this chapter is called "A Little Girl." So this is how it starts. So you kind of get a feel for the vibe of the book. And maybe that will put some of the article in context as well. She says, it starts with a little girl. She's sitting in a big classroom with a ceiling that's way too high. It is 1876, and the public primary school in Via San Nicola da Tolentino in Rome is like all the others in the Kingdom of Italy, a prison for children. You sit still at your desk. You listen to the teacher for hours. You repeat the lessons in chorus. If you behave badly, you are punished. I could have written that about my own education in public school. I wouldn't say it was true for all children in America, but yeah, Aubrey in the late 80s.
100 years later, right?
Yeah. So then she says, if you behave badly, you are punished. The little girl is 6 years old, and she has hated it all since the very first day. In silence, she begins her personal rebellion against the institution. Her attention goes out on strike, and in just a few months, she's the last in her class. You can relate to that.
Hey.
Right? David didn't love his education either. He was really bad in school. Long story.
How dare you?
He made up for it in college. All right, so at school, I didn't study at all, she'll say as an adult. Does that sound familiar to you? I paid very little attention to the teachers, using the lesson time to organize games and plays. And again, I didn't understand the arithmetic exercises. And for the longest time, I wrote down the answers using made-up figures, the first ones that came to mind. That is from Maria Montessori herself. She says, better at writing with a passion for books, she's a born actress. When it's her turn to read aloud in class some touching tale, she makes everybody cry. She has an outgoing nature, and despite her young age, a powerful charisma. When it's time to play in the courtyard during recess, she's the boss, no doubt about it. If a classmate protests, she shuts her up with a cutting remark. Why, you are not even born yet. She's got the gift of gab and the security that comes from being a little girl whose family dotes on her. Since the day she was born, her parents have jotted down in a notebook every detail of her life, as though she were a prodigy. Her first words, her first steps, her chatty cheerfulness, and above all, her vivacious and independent character. So we'll stop there, but doesn't that sound like a fun book to read?
It does.
Yeah. And the author, Jessica, kind of seemed to think it was really kind of overly dramatic and hyperbolic. But I actually think it seems like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It seems like a fun way to write about a biography. I don't want to read a boring biography of Maria Montessori's life. It's like she was born in this, and then she went to this school. Like, who wants to read that? I want to read the dramatic storytelling version. And I think Maria Montessori would have liked that version as well.
Yeah, I mean, there was a tendency to put Montessori, as we do with many great thinkers and leaders, on a pedestal. There's a kind of a hagiographic quality to some of the biography and what's written. But she's hardly the only one. I mean, Aubrey and I talked a little bit. You're not. The fact that she is a woman doctor from the late 19th century, and the criticism she receives for her life, I think, is somewhat telling about our attitudes around education and other things. But the fact is that, yes, I mean, maybe she didn't make everybody in the class cry. I don't know who was there. But I think it's meant to paint a picture. If you listen to her actually read her own words, she actually was a very engaging, charismatic person. She must have been, in order to achieve all that she did. So The fact is, like, yes, I'm sure there is hyperbole. I'm sure there is a little bit too much, but that doesn't necessarily detract from the whole of the book. And I think more importantly, though, it is sort of the question it leads to. I don't Is the biography well written or not? Is this the right story to tell? I don't know.
I don't know, but we will read it.
That's right.
We'll find out, right?
I mean, I think that where the challenge is that kind of the gist of the article more broadly is that, she may have started kind of in this pure place and was maybe motivated by her own educational experiences, but very quickly she fell into the domain of wealthy and privileged folks,
Yeah.
the people who, patrons, so to speak, who could kind of continue, who could support that work. And the trend really, basically, she's saying, is continuing on today, all the way through, as the article ends with a couple of paragraphs about Jeff Bezos, who was a Montessori alum and a couple of years ago put a couple $1 billion into a fund that in part aims to establish Montessori-inspired preschools. And I think that there's a lot of great questions that people are asked about, like private money and education and the role of public education. But this didn't really seem to explore it to that degree. It sort of throws it out. My sense was that it kind of is saying she went astray early in life. It kind of got consumed or subsumed or taken over by money interest, and then it continues. The last paragraphs of it say, she says, Bezos seems typical of much of the American commentariat in viewing teachers through the same lens as an Amazon worker, invisible, essential, marginalized, at the mercy of scores on whom everything depends and everything can be blamed. If Bezos can recast child-centered pedagogy as a form of customer service, then perhaps the ever-prophetic Montessori saw that too. Quote, "We teachers can only help the work going on," she wrote, "as servants wait upon a master." And that's a pretty strong language. Montessori obviously was not commenting about Jeff Bezos because they didn't actually, I don't think, even live at the same period of time. No. Maybe when he was a baby. I'm not sure exactly how old Bezos is, but she died in the 50s. I think he probably was born in the 60s. So not certain, but it's very strong language, and it works very, very hard to make a tenuous connection between Montessori, her works and words, and Jeff Bezos' business practices. And in fact, actually what we know about how Bezos runs his company, there's very little, if anything, about Montessori in it. We found in a Forbes interview last year that said, there have been, quote, "there have been many complaints from employees at Amazon's fulfillment centers. Workers allege that they are given backbreaking tasks in the warehouses. They also vent their dismay over intrusive surveillance technologies, including automated tracking systems and cameras that monitor their every move." I think we've heard similar reports from many people. And I think based on what we know, I go so far as to say that whatever Bezos might be doing with his money for Montessori schools, his company that I think really reflects his leadership style is very anti-Montessori.
And his philosophy on life in general and the value of human beings. And this could not be more in contrast with the Montessori method itself, or Maria Montessori's. When you read her lectures, it is so clear that she values the potential of every human being, and that's what it really is about. And in the Montessori method in general, whether you're in a classroom or whether you're homeschooling, what we value is not efficiency and independence. What we value is freedom and choice and respect for all of the living beings and all, like, the whole earth and of community. She talks so much about the responsibility that we have for each other and taking care of each other. And she talks a lot about morality and ethics. Those of you who are watching who are in the lower elementary program, you know that is like a core part of the whole curriculum for Montessori lower elementary is all centering around ethics and justice. And that, when I look at what Jeff Bezos is doing in his company, it's just not reflective of what I see Montessori to actually be. So I really feel like I was with the author while she was reviewing the book, and I was like, oh, yeah, I can, I haven't read this book, but I can see how it could be, kind of hyperbolic. But then when she gets down to saying that, like, oh, yes, and Jeff Bezos basically is like a reflection of Montessori education and what it exists as today, I started to get really offended. So here's another quote that I found from an CNBC article called What Really Happens to Amazon Returns. They said, from all of those returns on Amazon, this may be giving me a new recommitment to not ordering
Shop
on Amazon,
local.
right? Shop local.
Support your small business owners.
But they say from all of those Amazon returns, there is now nearly 6 billion pounds of landfill waste generated per year and 16 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions as well. That's the equivalent of the waste produced by 3.3 million Americans in a year. So, that's if you go and talk to actual Montessorians, they're going to tell you that they're pretty passionate about the environment because that is the way we're trained, and
it stems right from her own education,
exactly.
from late 19th century naturalism and understanding of the world.
Yeah, and I also have things to say about this quote about it as though we are servants waiting upon a master. Okay, so in today's context, saying something like servants waiting upon a master is problematic, right? It's not something we generally would say today without thinking about historical.
Of course,
yeah. I mean, it's just not something that is something we would say. Okay, it's problematic, and but it has been taken out of context. Okay, so I will explain that phrase to you right now, so we can just clear that one up. So in Montessori philosophy, that quote about as we are servants waiting upon a master, we're really talking about the little control that we have over the child's own development and eventual potential. It's a release. It is, we are not beholden to the child who is whining at us for more ice cream. Like, we are not serving them in that kind of sense. We are serving the bigger picture. We're serving the potential of humanity. We're serving each other as a community by raising our little people in the most loving and nurturing and wonderful way we can possibly imagine, to keep them not necessarily protected from the world's evils, but bolstered by community and by parental, familial, and societal support. And it's also an urge to us to be patient and trust the child. And not that we're going to be working for them in a slavish way so that we don't take care of our own personal needs. Sometimes it can feel like that in the Montessori community, like that this needs to be a totally selfless endeavor, helping to raise our children in a Montessori way.
The guilty feel over being sick for a few weeks and not able to be 100% with the homeschooling is another example of that, right?
Yes, absolutely is. So I personally will say I take offense to Jessica's use of that quote, pointing the finger at Maria, saying, I just think that she just missed the context of that particular quote.
Yeah, and maybe
it's because she got the quote from a biography of Montessori rather than reading the passage.
I suspect it's that's a benefit of the doubt. I think we know what's going on here. The fact is that what she's saying isn't actually completely wrong, though. I mean, we said it earlier. There are too few free public Montessori options. Her method is not widely incorporated into mainstream education. And if you look at who gets access to Montessori education, it does tend to be wealthier and wider people, in the US at least, and I think around the world. And that is a sin. That is not, it's a social sin. It's a disregard for what we think she actually was trying to teach, even though her biography and the trajectory of her life is complicated. And I think there's lots of ways that you could explore, like, why exactly did the elite embrace her work and why exactly wasn't it embraced in the US more broadly? And I think that would be an interesting kind of deeper concept to have to flow through. But the fact is that it is true. Yeah. That there is a contradiction in her early work and her words and the way it's experienced. But the question is, did she cause that? Is it is it her fault?
Yeah.
She died 70 years ago. Is that how much can we lay at her feet versus where the sin actually lies. And I would say that the sin is in the system, not in Montessori or in the pedagogy.
I mean, Marie Montessori herself, she had faults like every other human. She was not a perfect person, and she didn't make perhaps the choices that we would make today. I mean, that's just part of life and being human. You're going to make mistakes, and Marie Montessori certainly did make mistakes.
For sure.
She was dealing with the death of her mother. She had issues. She had a child out of wedlock, which was a big deal at the time. And so instead of taking the route to be a single mom and ruin her career, she chose to be a career woman and have her child raised in another family. And that's not a decision I personally would. I don't know. I think even it's hard. I think even if I were in her position, I just don't know that I am the type of person that would do that. But she was and did, and we wouldn't have the Montessori method in the way it exists today. We wouldn't have it if she hadn't. So I can forgive her for being antiquated and from another time, a person of her time. I can forgive that. But what I cannot forgive is what the Montessori powers that be who have carried on her legacy have done with Montessori education, where we are participating in carrying it forward, I think is crucial in terms of helping it to be more accessible to the general public. And I personally have really strong feels on that. Those of you who have been in my courses for a long time, that I don't think that Montessori educators can single-handedly fix the privilege problem that exists in America or anywhere else. I don't think that our small community, and it is a small, close-knit community, can fix a privilege problem as, an inequity problem as vast as exists in our society today. We can't stop the wars. We cannot make everybody be nice to each other. We can't stop Jeff Bezos from running a company that is
Yep.
less than nice to his employees. Okay, we don't have that kind of power. But there are things that we as a community can do. And I think that, as Mr. Rogers would helpfully remind us, we can look for the helpers that are out there right now in our modern world who are really trying to make a difference in the Montessori community to make it more accessible for other people.
Right, exactly. It's no, that's exactly right. The system is the issue, and part of the reason we chose to homeschool and many others is that we're not finding that the system is accommodating enough to what we believe about education and human potential and our individual choices. So more and more people are opting to homeschool for those reasons, and it's not necessarily the solution we would want to create the most equitable world, but it is, again, an offshoot of the way that the system is kind of set up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way. We personally chose it as option 3, a way to just kind of opt out of the system.
We actually, and I'm looking at the comment, we do actually know that it's considered somewhat radical. I mean, I think that humans have a natural desire to learn and teach, and that to prohibit them from teaching and learning is it's wrong in the deepest way possible. And we should embrace the best possible learning systems and theories there are, and Montessori fits within that, and that's why we feel so passionately like it should be for everybody. Everybody should have access to it in some ways, because it's a benefit to all humankind. And I think I'm not a Montessori apologist. I've talked before, I didn't know much about Montessori. I've read her. I have skepticism of this and that, but I think in total, her life was really dedicated on trying to progress the human spirit. I think she really did believe in certain things that we would align with today around individual choice and rights and peace and so forth. And the way that we teach, even academic subjects, or perhaps especially academic subjects, has to reflect that. And that's why it's maybe radical, but it shouldn't be. It should be the norm.
It should be the norm. And that's why I've always said that, I know that there are Montessorians out there who have this dream that every school will be a Montessori school. Why don't we make all public schools Montessori schools? And I just don't believe that. I think there are a lot of great public school educators that are out there right now making a difference in the public school system. But I do believe that most public school educators don't have access to the Montessori method. And all the resources that come with it, and the understanding of child development that comes with it. And so I think that is something I would love it if there were no more Montessori education, and instead it was just mainstream education, but we valued the child. Just valuing the child more, giving the child more choice. And I don't care about the Montessori name at all. I mean, I love it. Of course, it's my community, but in my ideal world, there wouldn't be a need for a Montessori community, because there'd be so many great schools out there who really focus on a child-centered way of learning.
Exactly.
And so my mission, and David's too, like our mission is not for the Montessori community to grow and there to just be more private Montessori school options. Our purpose isn't for there to be more Montessori public schools, although that would be awesome. And there's totally a great website you can go to if you're interested in that. It's called public-montessori.org. The organization is called Montessori in the Public Sector. So those are your people. If you're looking to advocate for a public Montessori school in your area or look for one, I think that the Montessori training centers do have some responsibility in making sure that Montessori is more accessible, especially to people of color, especially to people who are in low income situations, who can't necessarily afford to pay for their training. I feel like they should be going way out of their way, and maybe some of them are, but I see that as that is one way that we could make a difference in the Montessori community. I also see that there are Montessori training centers that are perpetuating elitism. Even now, they still are perpetuating elitism, and they need to stop by rejecting the hybrid models that exist, by saying there's only one way to Montessori, and you have to be certified with this exact certification, and your classroom has to look in this exact way, and you have to have all of these perfectly beautiful, designed, expensive materials in order to call it Montessori. That's a problem.
So gatekeeping, financial gatekeeping.
Yeah, they're
gatekeeping.
encouraging this. You might see it online, called a purist approach to Montessori. And whenever you see that kind of language, I think you should be pretty skeptical. If you ever see people online talking about how this or that is not Montessori or is bad, that should kind of give you a warning bell, and you should do a little more research to see what that person's point of view is. There are a lot of people out there who are still perpetuating that perspective on Montessori education, and it might not be necessarily super obvious. I can tell you that from my personal experience, even though I was a Montessori child, I grew up in Montessori, I knew I wanted to be a Montessorian one day, just like my mama. I went to college and I got a degree in elementary education. I got certified in grades 1st through 8th grade. I went back for a certification in preschool. And then I went on and I did some graduate work as well. But by the time I was done with my 4-year college degree, I had so much debt. My parents were taking it on. And so it wasn't like I was like, oh, yay, now I'll go get my Montessori certification. I wanted to, friends. I wanted to go right in and go get my Montessori certification. But the reality was I had a degree in education and you need to go find a job, right? And I think so many of our public school teachers are in that position.
Oh, it's much worse today. I mean, the cost of education has gotten so much higher.
Yeah, and so it's, when you create training centers where you have to be certified by a private industry, I think it's a problem for accessibility. Even if we're giving out little grants and scholarships out there, it just doesn't feel to me like it's enough. I would really love to see Montessori more integrated into just the basic
Yeah.
teacher education programs in college.
We will succeed when we don't talk about Montessori education anymore. We just talk about education.
Exactly.
So, I think the reason this, kind of just to draw it up, I know we're kind of at our end of time.
Yep.
But to kind of draw the reason this is, for me, important to talk about is, she makes a good point. I think she actually is hitting the nail on the head when she says somebody with she obviously has a pretty privileged position in society. You can't be whatever she is, the senior editor of the New Yorker and just Joe Schmo. Right. But so
just saying.
Just saying. So, if she's experiencing this, then there is something going on here that she's calling out. I think where it gets troubling is to try and turn it into some kind of proxy culture war about, some folks have been talking about elitism, capitalism, and so forth. And for more on the elitism problem, go to the special elitism podcast that's also connected to the baseball podcast. We're keeping it focused on education here. I think those are actually really that's right. But we want to be positive. I think for me and Aubrey, and for our children, I think a lot about this. I think we live in a world that is very cynical. We live in a world that has a lot of no's, and it feels very dark. There's a lot of hard news, and we can't turn our eye to that. But we have to feel empowered to make progress. We have to teach our children that they can make the world better, even if it feels very, very hard. Yeah. Children have to feel that sense of empowerment. And when we reduce even the positive things or stop talking about what are the real problems with limiting access to Montessori education, and we start to make this kind of culture war tie, it begins to undermine our ability to talk about the real things that are a problem and empower our children to be able to address those things. And it limits their ability to access the kind of education that would help them succeed, to have the critical thinking and creative thinking skills that they will need in order to go out and actually make that change. If we want the world to stop being so cynical, we have to start. The change has to begin. I believe that, that is why we're educators. It's a difficult time right now, but we do have, as Montessorians and as educators and as homeschoolers and as humans, we have a responsibility to not draw in broad brushes on these kinds of topics. We have to try and find a way to let that nuance and positivity speak again.
And that is what Montessori is all about, friends. Maria Montessori herself said it, a hope for, she said, mankind, but humankind really would be the modern translation. Hope is what Montessori is all about. It's about love and hope, seeing a better future for ourselves and for our children, thinking the best of our children, trusting them, trusting in the method, trusting in humanity. Yeah. And I think that Jessica missed that part of Montessori, and that's, that hurt my heart. But I'm glad that she wrote the article so we could have this conversation.
Totally. Yeah. We're at the top of the hour, so we want to make sure that if there are any quick questions, I know there's been a lot of great comments, but we take just a couple minutes to see if there's any last questions or comments.
Yeah. Did you guys have any questions for us before we go? Give you a little time to write.
So wait time, classic. Teacher wait time. All right.
Okay. All right. Well, friends, if you have any follow-up for us, anything you want to say, anything you want to talk about, you can email us at hello@childoftheredwoods.com. It'll go to both of us. One of us will respond. And we will see you next time. We'll have another live like this.
2 weeks.
In 2 weeks. We're going to do this twice a month. So see you then.
Bye.
Bye.